Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 7, Lesson 2, where we're talking all about endorsements. So let's jump right into it here and talk about what is it? So what is an endorsement? What the heck are we talking about? So my little definition here is that it's a way for an individual, like a prominent political individual or prominent community individual, or an organization to openly declare, like, one, this is the candidate you should support, and two, this is the candidate you should vote for. So the endorsement is often thought about with number two here. This is the candidate you should vote for. And while that is super, super critical that the organization convey to the whole wide world, hey, these are the people that you should vote for on election day when you're there in the polling booth. But this first part, this is the candidate you should support, is really helpful as well. And we'll talk about that more later on in this chapter. But when I say support, I mean give money to and volunteer for. So this organization can be seen as a vehicle for you to drive more volunteers and campaign contributions to your campaign. So that's the idea here. When an organization makes an endorsement of a political candidate, they're saying, hey, this is the guy. You need to get out there and support it, guy or girl. You need to get out there and support them, and you need to give them money, and you need to vote for them on election day. So what's the criteria for judgment here? What is it that they're going to be thinking about and looking at when they're being all judgy of you? So the first is your platform. What we talked about in lesson 2 or chapter 2 of this course, your campaign platform. So where do you stand on the issues and how are you conveying it out there to the world? Like, who are you? What's your message? What do you stand for? So that's your platform. Second, they're going to be looking at your viability. So the idea here is if you put yourself in an organization's shoes for a second. Say they're faced with two really, really great candidates, and they're a little bit torn between the two candidates because they both have the same sort of values. They're both fighting for the same thing. They know that that the candidates would probably vote similarly on legislation when they're in office, but they're not quite sure which candidate to support. So that's when they start looking at viability. Well, they consider viability the whole time. The idea here is, like, if you support one candidate over another, like, hey, I'm going to endorse Carol over Shelley, and you go all in behind Carol, and you're like, hey, everybody, you need to vote for Carol. She's the best. That's going to hurt Shelley. You might not necessarily want to hurt Shelley, but it does hurt Shelley because you're telling everybody to vote for Carol. Well, if Carol doesn't have a really good shot to begin with, and Shelley is a much more viable candidate, much more likely to win, well, then when Shelley gets into office and Carol is, gone back to her day job, or she's just chilling now, then you still have to, as an advocacy organization, you still have to go in and meet with Shelley when she's the sitting mayor of your town and be like, oh, yeah, so sorry about that whole telling everybody not to vote for you thing, but here's what my organization needs from you now. Yeah, that's an awkward conversation. So if you were considering viability more from the beginning, you'd say, hey, Carol's great, Shelley's great. Carol's probably not going to win. And when Shelley does win, we don't want her to be pissed off at us when she's in office. So we're going to throw our support behind Shelley. That's what we mean by viability. And it is a really huge consideration. When you look at, you can take a look at a lot of elections, but when, sorry guys, I'm getting over this nasty flu that I had a week or two ago. But when you look at a race like Hillary versus Bernie in 2016, Hillary was seen as a much more viable candidate from the very beginning, and it allowed her to really clear the field and get a lot more institutional support and line up endorsements of really huge organizations that might have otherwise supported Bernie. But Hillary was seen as the much more viable candidate. All right. So third criteria here that they're going to, third criterion that they'll be supporting, that they'll be judging you based on, is your history with that organization. So if a campaign is looking at two different candidates, let's talk about Carol and Shelley again. This is a new Carol and a new Shelley. They both have the same similar platform. They're going to fight for the same ideals. They're both really viable candidates. They've raised a lot of money. They resonate well with voters. They both have really strong campaigns up and running. Then what's the next thing that the organization looks at? The history with that organization. So if, this time we'll make Carol the winner. So if Carol has been a member of the organization for like 6 years, she comes to the organization's meetings every so often, she goes to the annual fundraising gala every year, she's marched in different like parades or festivals with this organization, then the organization is going to consider that as like an official metric or criterion when they're deciding who to endorse. So that's something else to think about, and something for you to consider as a candidate is that you might want to start fostering relationships with some of these organizations sooner than later. If you've been kind of around for a year or so, then the organization likes that. The longer the better. But something that shows that you're not just simply knocking on the door for the endorsement and some campaign cash really goes a long, long way. And in our example here with Carol and Shelley, if Carol and Shelley are both like exact same on their platform, they're both very viable candidates, then organizations for the most part are not going to endorse one candidate or the other. Because like I was saying, you don't want to endorse one candidate over another and then have them lose, and then the candidate that you didn't endorse is sitting in the office. That's a pretty big liability for most organizations, and it's a risk that they just don't need to take. So there are a lot of times when I was running Sacramento Stonewall Democrats that in the primary election we just didn't endorse because it was just too risky. Why endorse someone that's going to turn out to lose the race, and then you're pissing off somebody that's just as good and that could be just as good of a friend to your organization. Okay, so let's move on here. So let's look at the steps that it takes to get an organization's endorsement. That's primary or like a typical process that happens. So just, step one is to email the organization. So you're going to want to reach out to the president of the organization or the political action committee chair or the political chair of the organization. Those would be the two people that typically run the endorsement process. And I just put some typical language here, like, hey, I'm writing to seek the endorsement of Citizens United for Peace and Prosperity. I have to admit I'm not super familiar with the organization, but the more that I learn, the more impressed I am with it. So I've written this letter as if this is an organization that you have not been very familiar with. And there will be some. No matter how hard you try, there's going to be organizations that you just don't simply have enough time and resources to establish a repertoire with. So you just say, I'm running for this office, and then you insert some language in there that's from your 30-second, 1-minute pitch that we developed in Chapter 2. You say, I believe that my values are aligned with your organizations, et cetera, et cetera. I want to work together. Then you say, hey, I've CC'd the political director from my campaign. She's going to be coordinating the logistics around endorsements. Can you please provide us with any information on what we need to do to formally seek your organization's endorsement? We'd really appreciate it. Thank you for your time and consideration. In solidarity, Chris Moore, candidate for yada, yada, yada. So that's the just first step there, is reach out to the organization. And you'll notice I said something on here about I CC'd the political director for your campaign. Sorry, guys. In previous episodes, in previous chapters, we talked about forming your campaign kitchen cabinet and paid staff. And one of the positions that we talked about was your political chair. And at that time I mentioned that running the endorsement process would be one of the most important pieces and meaty pieces of their work. And this is what I'm referring to. You'll want that person on your campaign to manage this whole process. Everything that we're talking about right now in this chapter or in this lesson is what you'll want your political chair to manage for you. So step 2 is typically a questionnaire. So the questionnaire is normally a very integral process of endorsements done by community organizations. And it's basically a way for them to see, like, who are you, what are your values, and do they align with our organization? So the questionnaire is used to assess your stance on the issues. It's an opportunity for you to describe your platform, describe your campaign plan. And by that, I mean a lot of questionnaires will ask you, like, what's your plan for winning? How much money have you raised? Who's your campaign manager? They'll ask very pointed questions like that quite often. And it can be historical and forward-looking. So a lot of the times they'll ask you, like, did you vote or did you publicly support, this policy initiative? Or when this issue was on the ballot in 2000, whatever, did you vote yes on it? They'll ask questions like that. But then they'll also say, if you win office, will you, always vocally oppose yada, yada, yada? Or can you commit to supporting XYZ? They'll ask you forward-looking questions like that as well. So I just kind of pasted a questionnaire here. This is from the Stonewall Democratic Club of New York City. You can just kind of see what it looks like. And it is literally quite actually a questionnaire that you fill out. You write your responses down to it and you mail it back to the organization. You scan it and email it back to them, fax it, whatever they want, and get it back to them. So typically, in addition to a questionnaire, the organization will want to do an interview with you as well. So the interview typically builds on the information that's in the questionnaire, but then it also goes a little bit further. So the interview is typically like a one-on-one with the political director of an organization or the president of the organization. It can also be done in a group setting. When I was the political director for Equality California, California's principal LGBT rights organization, I ran the entire endorsement process for the primary election and general election, and we endorsed candidates for every 80 state assembly seats, the 40 state senate seats, everyone running for statewide office in California. So I was at the state level, and then we also endorsed in every congressional district. So it was 45, I think there's 45 seats in California. We endorsed in all of those. And so I ran that whole process. And we did a questionnaire that we sent out to everyone. But then in addition, we also held interviews with every candidate. And that was done, I would typically have in more contentious races that were a little bit more difficult to assess, I would have a one-on-one interview with the candidate early on, and then we would do a formal interview with the candidate with our entire political action committee, which I can't remember how many folks are on there, maybe 20 people, and yeah. So anyway, it can take a variety of formats, but you'll typically have a one-on-one at some point. And so here's how it's going to go down in that interview. A big chunk of what they're going to be talking about is viability. They're probably not going to take the time to interview you if the questionnaire doesn't reveal that you are in line with the values of that organization. So if they are taking the time to interview you, then what they're really going to want to take a deeper dive into is your viability. And that could be asking you how much money you've raised, asking you about how much staff that you've hired or who you've lined up to support you, like like any like prominent endorsements or people that are working behind the scenes for your campaign. And they're also just going to want to take a look at like that X factor sort of thing when they're talking to you. Are you inspiring them in a way that like a superstar politician would? Are you filling them with energy? Do you suck energy out of the room? Do you talk about your like vision for your community in a way that's inspiring, that's probably going to want to pull voters along with you? And so they're going to be looking for all of those different factors to see, like, are you a really viable candidate? Are you going to win this race or not? Okay, a step 4 would be a candidate forum. So this doesn't always happen, but for more like community-based type organizations, they probably will have a candidate forum. So I have a picture of me here that was at an event for Sacramento Stonewall Democrats, and I think it was a candidate forum, but anyway, I ran the candidate forums for Sacramento Stonewall. There's a picture of it. So this is really, I mean, when you talk about grassroots politics, this is grassroots politics to the max. So the way that this event, this candidate forum is going to go down is it's going to be a Saturday or a Sunday probably, and it's going to be hours and hours long, and the organization is going to have every candidate for every office that they're going to endorse in. They're going to have all those candidates there in one day. And no matter how hard people try and organize it and make it a seamless experience, it's timed really well, it's not going to be. And no, I'm just kidding. Not every time. But good chance that it's not going to be timed very well, and you're going to have to wait around and like wait to talk. The room is going to be filled with people. It's going to be a little bit noisy. And it's going to be person after person that gets up and gives their like 2-minute spiel about like why they are running for office, why that you should support them. People are going to be jockeying in the back of the room to line up votes for people. And what's going to happen is that after all of this goes down, all these like candidate speeches and everything, they're going to take votes on each one of these offices. And there will be some sort of threshold, about like a 60% or 55%, or maybe it's a simple majority, in order to get an endorsement of the organization. So that's like a big picture of what this like candidate forum is. So like I said, like a mess, disorganized, that's the norm for these things. Not when I did it though, for Sacramento Stonewall and for Equality California. Perfectly seamless, beautiful day. So your 2-minute pitch is going to come in very handy here, and you'll want to tailor it to that specific organization though. So if the organization is really all about like environmental conservation, then you're going to pull out those bits and pieces from your campaign platform that are related to that and tailor that into that 2-minute pitch. So this is really an opportunity. If you're ever going to have an opportunity to act like a cheesy politician and really ham it up, then this is the opportunity to do it. So I say just relish the moment and do it, and just really ham it up and get cheesy. It might feel very, very like fake or cheesy to you, but chances are the organization is going to eat it up. You know the line, like don't cross the line of like too cheesy over the top, but you know what I mean. Okay. So step 5 here is the decision. So like, what is the campaign going to, or what is the organization going to do? So it's best to know the decision process from the beginning of the process, because it could be that they require, like I was saying earlier, a vote of all of the membership body, or like a 60% vote, a 2/3 vote, maybe it's a 50% vote. Maybe they require members to be in good standing for 3 months before they can vote. So I know that in Sacramento Stonewall, that was a really big deal, because part of our bylaws said that you had to be a member for at least 45 days or some number of days. I think it was between a month and 3 months, a month and 2 months, something like that. Approximately 45 days that you had to be a member before you could vote on an endorsement in our official endorsement meeting. So what happened is candidates that wanted the Sacramento Stonewall endorsement, they would reach out to people that they knew were Stonewall members and make sure that they had paid their membership dues, or they would reach out to people that they thought would be Stonewall members, would be interested in being Stonewall members, and get them to sign up, all like 45 days before the endorsement meeting. And what it did was like proved to be a really powerful membership boost for Sacramento Stonewall. Really boosted up our membership numbers and our fundraising. We had more money to work with in that situation, but it also like drove tons and tons and tons of excitement about Sacramento Stonewall and the endorsement. So from an organization's perspective, it was great. From a candidate's perspective, it was probably really exhausting and a ton of work just to get that one organization's endorsement. So you'll want to understand that whole process from the beginning, so that if that is something that you want to go about doing, driving up membership numbers and getting people to vote. So another form that it might take is just a vote of the leadership for the endorsement. That's how Equality California, EQCA, when I was their political director, we had, it's hard to classify like members, but there were I think like 650,000 people that we considered members of the organization at that time. And I forget that, I think, this is a little while ago, guys, I don't remember exactly, but I think we had like 650,000 people that were considered members of Equality California. So what do? You ask all them to vote? No. It was a vote of our Political Action Committee, which I think was about 20 people. And so understanding that vote from the beginning was more beneficial for candidates, so that they knew how to, lobby for support. So that does it for lesson 2, all about endorsements. I hope that this was eye-opening for you folks that aren't familiar with this process at all. Like I said, I really, really love this part of campaign politics, and it's where I have a ton of experience. So if you have any questions about anything, then just ask it over here on the side, and I'll try and get back to you, or shoot me a Snapchat or something, and we'll talk. Thanks, guys.